Welcome to training session number 1. If you have not already seen my video called Mind Control Overview, you probably want to go have a look at that. That video paints a broad brush stroke of what mind control is, how widespread it is, um, how an army of survivors are operated throughout the world, and again, a real broad overview, real simplified version of what programming looks like. That's a good place to start. If you've already seen that video, no need to see it again. But I want to begin today by just looking at some pictures of the Kabbalah tree that have different components on it. So let's look at some of these pictures. So I'm just going to talk in general. This is naming some of the components of the Kabbalah tree, because you don't have to deal with all the programming that's in a survivor system to deprogram them, but you do have to deal with what I call base programming. And if I had to define what base programming is, I'd say that it's the skeleton of the Kabbalah tree, where all the programming is held. So the Kabbalah tree represents a structure that all the programs and the parts are contained on. And so base programming would be the parts in the system and the programs that create a skeleton of this Kabbalah tree. And so if you take down the skeleton, the original scaffolding, all the other programs fall. In order to deprogram, working with base program and those original splits is the goal. So here's a couple of pictures of Kabbalah trees. You can see the circles on them. Those circles are called sephirot. One of them is called a sephirah, and the plural word is sephirot. They're associated with colors. Um, we'll hear in next week's teaching how the bottom 7, the red, blue, yellow, orange, green, purple, and brown, black, multicolored Sephirah, they correspond to the 7 living stones that are the makeup of man. Um, I believe that's what they are from the Bible. So we'll talk about that next time. But during programming, the top 3 Sephirot or circles, Keter, Bina, and Chakma, are created. They were not a part of our original makeup of mankind. And so we'll talk more about how programmers do that. And you've heard in programming us talk about gemstones, finding the gems. The Snow White programming involves fallen entities that are dwarfs that mine for gems, mine for the living stones of man. So you could also call in programming those Sephirot um, gems, living stones. And we'll talk more detail about them, how to find them, how they're changed during programming so that it serves the purposes of the devil. But for now, notice the 3 pillars. So the pillar on the right that has sitting on it Chakma, Kesed, Netzach, that's called the pillar of mercy. Pillars hold things up. They hold a structure up. And there's many different programs on each of these pillars. If you remove the pillars, you're going to cause the crumbling of the whole Kabbalah tree, which is the purpose of deprogramming. So that first pillar of mercy, it contains stacks of father figure programs. And by father figure, I mean father attachment figures that may involve trauma that happened by the real biological father. It can mean the male programmers that the child is attached to. But either way, it's going to be all of the male figures that were significant in the life of the survivor and the associated traumas and parts that were created and are bonded to those father figures are represented on that pillar of mercy. And you would say there's in the occult, alchemy, which is a real high level of witchcraft that creates and destroys worlds and races and things like that. Energy is broken down to its most basic components and reordered to do alchemy, to build things, to create things. And so they manipulate masculine and feminine energy. And so the energy that is contained on that pillar of mercy, the father pillar, is considered to be masculine energy, right? Masculine energy gives and it's generated. It's usually involves creating lots of emotional energy. It's generated and then it's passed to the other pillar that we're going to talk about in a second, the feminine energy or the pillar of severity. And feminine energy takes, it receives that energy, and then it creates, it births, it makes things. And so energy in the occult has nothing to do with gender. It's the quality of that energy, the creating and the generation of it, and then the receiving of it and using it to do alchemy. So that pillar on the right, it contains father figure programs, father figure attachment parts that are attached to the father figures. It contains masculine energy, and it was originally started, that pillar began to be built by the original split off of the child that holds shame. And and it might be a part that looks like a turtle or calls itself turtle, or a human little girl that calls itself Shelly, and it may not, it doesn't have to. But there'll be an original split that held the shame of incest with the father or the father figure of a programmer. And that one part will have begun the building of that pillar of mercy. And so it's really important to find, when you're working with the survivor, the youngest split of a program or of a system. And because if you're working with a 13-year-old part, that part will have been split so many times from the original part. It doesn't have as much authority and it doesn't contain as much life force, right? Because the more you split a part off from its origin, its original part, the less life force it has in it, right? If it's the 100th split, it only has 1/100th of the life force that the original did, right? So whenever I'm doing deprogramming, you want to find the youngest part. So if you have a 13-year-old part that's full of shame, I would sit and say, where's the youngest part of you that felt like this the first time? Let's see if we can find that first time when you were a baby or you were little and you were a toddler and you felt this same shame. And so if you can find the original shame part, she's responsible for the beginning of generating this pillar of shame, because that whole pillar stands for many things, because lots of programs reside on it and parts. And so that pillar of shame was originally built by this little small part who will have been incested with the father. And so we want to find that part and begin working with that part, gaining trust, helping her to maybe be ready to come to Christ. The pillar on the far left is the opposite of the father pillar. It's the mother pillar, and it's called the pillar of severity. And so you have Bina, Geburah, Hod, those gems, living jewels, living stones rest on that pillar. And that's called the pillar of anger. So you have a pillar of anger, that's the mother, and a pillar of shame, that's the father. Probably apart from feeling, um, experiencing programming that involved God rejecting you and harming you, or Christ, the most damaging of all is mother betrayal, abandonment, and rejection. And so the splits that are on that mother pillar, they contain the very primal instincts of the individual. If you keep drawing out compassion and empathy, in a child, and then you betray them with mother figures, they're going to split off the compassion and the empathy. And if you do it enough times, you're left with parts that are only the primal instinct. They have very animal instincts to just live and not die and do whatever it takes to live. And those are the parts that make up what's called epsilon programming, the Greek programming, the animal parts, parts that don't believe they're human and they're animals. And so they're very angry, wrathful, vengeful. And so they'll be on that pillar of severity, and they would have been created by very severe mother traumas. And again, the energy that they're composed of in that mother pillar um, is feminine energy. Feminine energy takes. And so you'll actually see within the survivor energy exchange between the father pillar, the masculine, and the feminine, where emotions are generated by the father incest and sex and trauma. And those emotions are sent over in an infinity symbol, right? Over into the female pillar that takes. And those parts use that energy to create, to birth, to generate worlds and races. And we'll talk about that in later de- uh, teaching sessions in detail. But I just want you to see how these pillars operate together. And then the third pillar in the back, it holds Keter, which is going to be a counterfeit antichrist part. It holds Tipperet, Yesod, and Malkuth. It's called the pillar of balance. You can think about that third pillar as being, we'll talk more detail about it. Again, I'm just trying to give you some terms and general explanations. So you're probably going to only understand this in part until we do more teaching. But think of that third pillar as the AI interface, that this part, there's going to be an infant in a cave, a child infant part that acts as the counterfeit Christ that sits up there in Keter. And that child will have been so disillusioned with life because of all that they've experienced. They'll be coached by the programmer to reject their humanity. They don't want to be a part of the human race, reject the true God, and reject their fellow man. They agree to turn over all aspects of their heart, soul, which is your mind, your body, and your heart, over to various fallen entities, and agree to interface with a quantum computer that can give them a virtual reality, that can send frequencies to cause things like oxytocin to be released in their body, the bonding hormone, and have all kinds of comfort and feely goods done by frequency to comfort them in exchange for their being. right? So that back pillar, it's kind of like Jesus in the machine, Jesus in the AI. It represents that virtual reality of the cosmos, the hive mind, the second heaven, collective consciousness space. You'll understand this better later, but that's what that pillar represents. But it operates within the realm of death. So you end up with this triangle of that exists. If I were to draw lines between those three pillars, it's like it makes a triangle. And so you'll have the child, the survivor, jump between anger on that mother pillar. And when it builds too high in the system, it'll jump to the father pillar of shame. And when that shame pillar builds up energy too high, it'll jump to that back pillar, the AI and the machine, which is in the realm of death. Okay. All spirit beings are, humans included and angels, spirit beings are an entity, a living entity, but they also have a domain that they govern. That's their God given domain and realm. And so the spirit of death is a real living entity, and his domain, you can go and enter into death. Right? That's why you see in the book of Revelation, you see death and Hades as spirits functioning as entities riding horses, but people can go into the domain of death and Hades because it's a realm as well. Man's realm that he's been given dominion over and is to guard and maintain is the realm of his heart, right? Well, I think I have a video on the imagination about that if you want to check that out. Um, so that third pillar operates within the realm of death, and it's in the domain of the spirit of death. And so your omega programming, your suicide, the near death experiences for the child to enter into that and cross the over into the AI interface, over into the third pillar, it requires a sacrifice. And so the way that's usually done, the child will have parts inside of them that had near death experiences, and he will relive that near death experience. And that produces enough energy to pierce the veil and cross over into that realm of death. And you will actually find that survivors, when they're honest with you and when they can trust you enough and you can deal with it, they have this romance with death. Death becomes their escape, it becomes their place of peace. And it is not easy to work with the parts that are addicted to that, to death. And it'll be a real space that has to be worked on to get those parts ready to give up death as their resting place, as their place of peace, and come into the life of Christ. But that death is represented by that pillar in the back. So you end up with that triangle again of death, anger, and shame. And the survivor will cycle through, um, jumping from death to anger to shame, death to anger to shame. The survivor learns to jump from one space to another, because if they sit too long and allow their emotions to build, for instance, let's say a survivor's attachment, um, their attachment gets triggered. Let's say that I have a client that I'm going to have to pass over to another counselor, right? I've taught them how the basics of deprogramming, and I need to go teach another group of people. So I pass them to a new counselor to be their primary person. And that's going to trigger their attachment, and they're going to feel angry. They're going to naturally get angry. It triggers all of the abandonment issues that they had. And anybody who's worked with children who have attachment disorders, you see that the mother attachment, when it's broken and betrayed and non existent, it causes rage within a baby, because that, next to God, that a mother attachment, there's nothing more important, and especially early on in life. So there are things that we do all the time that trigger that mother attachment for a survivor. And so anger towards me is going to begin to build. Now, when it reaches a peak, the survivor is programmed to jump into death or to jump into shame. And they often will do that because they're afraid that if they get too angry, they might harm me or harm their mother attachment figure. But when you don't jump and you sit with them in that memory, they'll remember the programming that happened. And it'll once you remember the tricks that happen in a programming session, that program doesn't work any longer. And so I don't, you don't want to do this till the person's ready, but sitting in one of these three jumping spaces, death, anger, and shame, remembering their original memory that caused the split will dismantle it. And so another risk that, well, it's the same risk, but the risk that the survivor has for is if they sit too long in shame or they sit too long in the death, they're going to have bleed through of those trauma memories. So they learn to balance by jumping. They let anger build in the anger domain, the pillar of the mother, the pillar of severity. And then they'll jump to shame, which is the pillar of mercy. And as shame emotions build, they jump to the death pillar where they escape. All this energy generating is what creates energy. Energy is life force that's used to do alchemy. And so the pillars operate like that. The parts in those pillars do. So let's look at the second picture of the Kabbalah tree over here on the right. I want you to notice the 4 circles. You see the first circle at the top, it's called, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Atzilut, the world of emanation. And then you see it is surrounding the secret Sephirot called Da'at, Bina, Keter, and Chakma. And then you see Berea, which is the world of creation. That circles 4 Sephirot. And then you see Yetzirah, circles 4 of the Sephirot circles. And then the bottom one just has 2, Asiya. They're called the 4 worlds. And those 4 worlds are using different components of human life force to do alchemy. I'm not going to get into detail today, but I just want you to notice that first, the world of emanation involves using the human spirit. And then the second one, Berea, the world of creation, that involves the soul and the human intellect, where the survivor begins to muse and use their intellect to think on what they want to build or create or do with their creative energy. Yetzirah is the world of formation. That is the domain of the heart. If you've seen my video on the imagination, I talk about James 1:15, where that the heart has the ability, it's the imagination, it's the eye of the heart, that you have the ability to create using the strong desires of the heart. You can birth death. You can birth things for good or bad using that heart realm. So that world is called the world of formation. The human heart and imagination has the ability to form things. So it started as the life force in the spirit, using the intellect where the world of creation starts. It begins to take form in the realm of the heart. And then Asiya is the world of action, which represents the material realm where things manifest. So we'll talk later about the 4 worlds, but I just wanted you to see that it's using some component, each of these 4 worlds of the human life force of our being to create. Also on this s- um, Kabbalah on the right, notice the pathways. There's 22 pathways on the Kabbalah tree, and they're basically ley lines that go between each of the Sephirot. Now, we'll learn later that the 7 living stones that are part of our makeup, which are the bottom 7 brightly colored Sephirot, the gems, the living stones, they will each be assigned to one of the 7 planets, the 7 traditional planets, and you will have the child will have dedicated that stone, that part of their being, to the entity in charge of that planet. And so deliverance and ministry involves taking back that component of themselves, cleaning it up, and breaking ties with those 7 entities that rule over the domain of the 7 traditional planets. So the pathways between each of those domains are called ley lines. When a survivor astral projects in the astral plane, they leave residue of their being in the spirit realm or wherever they're astral projecting to. The more times they travel back and forth between the two domains, more residue is left. And let's say other people begin to travel on the highway or the ley line that I'm creating, they leave residue. So it becomes more, the residue makes it more solid. And what might be just a pathway can turn into a highway. And ley lines are like highways in the spirit realm that human life force and entities can travel on. And so each of those 22 ley lines on the Kabbalah tree correspond to one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And if you notice as well, they have names on these pathways in this picture: the magician, the fool, the empress, the high priestess. That also corresponds to tarot cards of the same name. So if you were to go and look at the tarot cards of the same name and the story behind the tarot card, that gives you an idea of the nature of the programming story that was used during pathworking of programming. So when a survivor becomes in the late teenage years, that's the time that they get something called pathworking programming. And pathworking is about them building pathways, ley lines or highways, not only between the Sephirot, but also between ancestors and other realms and other people. Um, and that's called pathworking. So let's look at another slide of a Kabbalah tree. So what I wanted you to see in this slide is that the Kabbalah tree is made up of mirror images. You have the top of the tree that they call the tree of life, and the bottom mirror image is called the tree of death. Just know that this is not the same tree of life that's in the Bible. This is a counterfeit. We'll see next in training session 2, next time that we get together, how the living stones are altered. And as I said, the top 3 Sephirot, Keter, Bina, and Chokmah, did not exist before the child was programmed, and neither did the bottom tree of death. We'll see exactly how that's created in the next training session. But just notice for now that there is a mirror image of the tree of life, the tree of death. They match Sephirot for Sephirot. And this is what is called the as above, so below program that we'll talk about later on as well. Notice in the top of the tree, the Star of David, some call it. I don't like to call it the Star of David because it's really an occult symbol that stands for Israel. It's the seal of Solomon, they call it in the occult. Solomon fell because of all his wives that were involved in pagan worship. And so he has all kinds of information the occult uses of how to manipulate and control and work with demons. And so we'll call this the seal of Solomon or just a hexagram. So each one of those colors on that hexagram is going to have one of the stones or the sephirot, one of the living stones or stones on the sephirot, associated with it. You will have the Nakash, who is the seven-headed beast in Revelation that rises up out of the sea of humanity. Remember, there's two beasts. There's one that comes out of the sea. Man created it. Man created, and the woman rode that beast. And then there's a beast on the shore. So each of the living stones, there'll be seven hoods of that serpent, seven heads of the serpent or a dragon. It's the same thing. And in the hood, in the seven hoods of that serpent, the Nakash will be one of the gems, and it'll correspond to Venus, to one of the seven traditional planets. The yellow in the center is the sun. And so you could say that these symbols represent whole programs. There will be the red gem, which is tied to Geburah, and the gem, the living stone, will be held captive in Mars and the entity assigned to Mars. Mars is also called Ares. He's also called Vulcan, but they're real entities. And so deliverance involves getting back that gem and breaking ties with that entity. So again, you see that symbol representing the living stones, where they're located, and what domain programming puts them in. The symbol of the six-pointed star, the hexagram, is a macrocosm symbol. Macrocosm meaning that the parts that are associated with that symbol will be found in the universe, in the cosmos, in the outside of the survivor, because you see that they're assigned the domains in the planets, where the planets are. At the bottom of the tree, the pentagram, that is a micro symbol. Micro means that the parts that are associated with that symbol will be found in the domain of man, right? It's going to either be in his body, his heart, his mind, his soul, but it's going to be micro, right? So you find those parts that make up the pentagram in the domain of man. You find the symbol of the six-pointed star, which is a macro symbol. Those parts are found scattered in the universe. So back to the pentagram. Each color on the triangles of the pentagram represent one of the elemental spirits. You can read about the elemental spirits in the Bible. They're very high-ranking spirits. Red is associated with the element of fire, blue with water, yellow with air, white with ether, and green with earth. So and again, I'm just giving you guys a broad view, but each one of those points, you will have a child, a part of the child that has a near-death experience that is dedicated. The parts that split off during the trauma, during that near-death experience, will enter into the realm of the elemental associated with it. So you will have a blue the blue triangle, which is water. The child will go through a near drowning experience as they're going through that trauma parts. They'll be coached by the programmer to say, go ahead and follow the elemental spirit of water and go into the realm of water. They will protect you. And so the element of water will take that life force that split off from the child who was dying, and he'll partner with that child, that part of that child's being, to build his domain in the water realm. build things, create things, destroy things, reproduce, because entities don't have the ability to do that. Only man does. God does too, but we're created in his image. And so you end up finding the split parts of the child. They partner with these entities. The entities get their domain that they oversee built and constructed as they want. And for that, they give secret knowledge, they give protection, they give all kinds of perks to the child. It becomes this dual relationship. And the same thing, the air, it'll usually be in an asphyxiation, and the child will split off during that near death experience and go over the rainbow into the realm of air, which is where the elemental of air's domain is. Earth involves some kind of burial. Fire is a near death fire experience. Ether going into the spirit realm. So I just, like I said, I wanted you to see that actually the two stars will be developed in the programming system before the tree. They're the precursors to the development of the tree. That's why you see them there. I also want you to notice that you see on the side of this picture, you see the serpent hanging on the pole, like the brass serpent in the Bible, and you see the hanging man, which is a tarot card, an image on a tarot card. You will find in the survivor system a serpent at the top of the tree and a serpent at the bottom of the tree. We'll talk in a lot more detail about that. Um, there'll be a part that of that serpent that's spirit, and a part that contains life force of the child, and that serpent will be the counterfeit Christ in the mirror image. The hanging man, the last trauma that the child experiences is the fire elemental, and they will have a programming set up where they experience falling from heaven. And the programming storyline recounts Satan falling from heaven like lightning. And so you'll have the parts at the bottom of the tree be fallen parts. They believe they can't be saved, that they're damned, so they might as well be good at being evil. Okay, and so that's the symbolism that you see there. So let's take off the slides and figure out how to do that. Okay. So I want to just again, I want to talk about first some of the most common misconceptions and mistakes that survivors and counselors present with. Um, no matter how many times that I share this information with counselors, it's like they say they believe me, but they don't really believe me till they experience this. Um, and the reason why I take the time to do this is I learned these things the hard way, and it's painful, and I want you guys to try to avoid getting secondary post traumatic stress. Um, and so that's why I'm taking the time to share this. It may be a little too much information too fast for a survivor. Um, but I want to put it in a video anyway. So they're going to eventually need to hear this information. Let's see how it goes. So I just have a list of common misconceptions and mistakes. I'm actually going to read them. It helps me to be more succinct. Um, the first one is called the fake escape. We hear lots of survivors on the internet talking about their escape and how they've escaped. And so it's commonplace to hear survivors tell stories of how they escaped their cult family and they're running for their lives and hiding from their ex captors. What this actually translates to is that front parts of the system, They've become aware that they're living a dual life. Some type of cult memory that was hidden in the back, the night, the cult side of their system, has bled through dissociative barriers and entered into the conscious awareness of the front day side part of the system. Such an event may then drive the survivor to plan his escape, run away, and go into hiding. The front parts believe they are now free from the cult. While in hiding, they may report being followed, harassed, even accessed and re traumatized. This is extremely scary and paralyzing for the survivor. But this is only the experience of the front parts of the system who are not attached to or loyal to cult members. The front parts don't see the sabotage and betrayal the back parts of the system are rendering against them. The front parts of the system want desperately to believe they've escaped because they're terrified of what they've learned via these bleed through memories. The front parts are highly motivated to use their dissociative skills that they've mastered to block out cult activities and return visits that the back parts of the cult are making. The cult loyal back parts are not only returning to the cult willingly, but they do it because they want to. The Christian survivors' front parts very much want Christ and to serve Him, but simultaneously they have back parts that hate and even loathe Christ, who are loyal to Lucifer, to his kingdom and his agenda. These parts love the power, alchemy, witchcraft, and perks that fallen entities and dark side living affords them. Please hear me. There is no authentic healing or deprogramming without addressing these issues on the back parts head on, with the back parts head on. This duality is in every program survivor. You'll understand this duality better when you've learned how base programming operates. All splitting of the mind occurs across opposite lines. The mind naturally splits across two opposing conflicts. For example, the survivor needs to continue loving their parents because their survival and their mental health depend on maintaining those attachments. But they hate the parents for betraying, abandoning, and hurting them. The child is not safe if he rejects his parents, and the child is not safe if he stays with his parents. To remedy this unresolvable conflict, the mind splits across the lines of love and hate. One part of the child dissociates the experiences of being harmed by the parents so he can keep his bond with them. The part of the mind that remembers the abuse and hates the parents keeps his secrets from the opposite part behind dissociative barriers. All splits occur because of unresolvable conflicts across opposite lines. A few examples of splits of the mind that happen in programming are between faith, parts that have faith, parts that doubt, parts that have pride, and parts that are shame based, parts that are living in the realm of death and have a romance and love with death and life. Likewise, there are daytime parts of the system and nighttime parts. There are parts in the system that were victimized, and their opposing splits include parts that perpetrate harm to others. Because of the way the mind splits, it's not possible to have only a day side of the system. Likewise, it's not possible to have only victimized parts. Not if a person's programmed. There has to be perpetrator parts to balance out the victimized splits. Remember, I'm talking about programmed individuals here, not traditional trauma. You could have a person that's not programmed that has multiple personality and they only have parts in their system that are victimized. You're still going to have angry parts that stand up. But I'm talking about people who are programmed. That's very strategic. It's base programming's the same in everybody across the world. It's not possible to only have a victim side. A survivor who has not worked with their cult loyal parts and the parts who hate Christ and love Lucifer is not deprogrammed. Unless dealt with and transformed, cult loyal parts remain loyal and still return to the cult. It will take quite a bit of work with the survivor to get them ready to see, process, and acknowledge just how divided and at odds they are across their night and day systems. A survivor who escapes will continue to have their cult loyal parts go back to the group, engage in rituals, and all aspects of cult life until those back parts have been identified, acknowledged, and had enough healing to be willing to switch sides. Cult members and programmers, they don't mind letting survivors believe they escaped because they know that there are hundreds of cult loyal parts in the backside of the system who will gladly return to them dutifully. Please know that backup programs exist in every, well, not every, but many levels of the survivor, and they serve to remedy and reconstruct normal functioning of programming operations when deprogramming efforts are made. So, until the base programming is strategically addressed and undone, status quo cult operations resume as usual. In our training sessions, we will discuss at length what base programming is and how to dismantle it. But for now, please know there's no authentic escape from the group without undoing the base programming. Even if you were physically separate, if you were to physically separate the survivor from their group and sit with them, guarding them 24 hours a day, you would not prevent the cult loyal parts from returning to the cult. If they cannot physically reconnect with their cult group, they will astral project and meet on the astral plane where most of their alchemy, witchcraft, and dark shenanigans take place anyway. So, the second, number two, the misunderstanding or misconception is passive healing. It's not a real thing. Survivors often come to us as counselors or healing ministers with the expectation that the counselor or healing minister is going to heal them. And they mistakenly believe that their role is a passive one. This is understandable when one learns that programming trains the survivor to no longer think for themselves and to give up responsibilities for their own lives over to their programmers and fallen entities. So, a huge part of recovery involves helping the survivor take back that responsibility for their own lives, to find their voice again, to learn how to assert themselves appropriately, and how to learn how to get their needs met in healthy ways. Again and again, they will look to the counselor to tell them what to do and to do things for them. But healing is not passive. It cannot happen without the will of the survivor plugging in and doing the growth work needed to recover. The survivor will need to be walked through the developmental stages they missed. They'll need to learn new social and coping skills that will replace their habit of dissociation. You'll find that the most talented and gifted parts of the survivor are found in the cult loyal part of the system. The survivor's purpose for life is found there on the occult side. You could say that the programmer puts all of the eggs in the occult side of the basket. Therefore, identifying and walking out God's purpose for their lives as a survivor is a critical part of recovery. because they have very little bit of their life force invested in the material realm. So, finding the occult parts and helping them see the greater purposes for their life are in God's plan for them, not in Lucifer's. That's a key part of getting the survivor to become invested in the earthly realm in this part of their life. Another common belief that survivors have, and I see this so much, is that they believe that demons are their main problem. And if they can just find the right prayer or the method of deliverance, that they'll be deprogrammed and healed. I wish it was that easy. Please know that demons are a symptom of human dysfunction and sin. And if you drive out demons and you don't change the problems that attracted the demons in the first place, then you're going to have accomplished nothing. The fallen entities just come back shortly after you expel them, and they bring a few friends with them, making the person worse off than they were. Authentic deliverance involves making big life changes by the person that's delivered. If a person is prayed for and they get delivered, and even if they're healed of the emotional pain and trauma they've endured, but they don't learn new healthy coping skills, social skills, how to get their needs met, how to set appropriate boundaries, when to let people in to love on you and meet your needs, and when to shut them out, then they're only going to be set up by those demons to be hurt again. And without healthy ways to deal with that hurt, then they're going to be traumatized again and just take those same demons back into them to help them cope. That's what demons do. People use demons to cope and to protect them because they don't know how to do it God's way. And often cases, they don't want to do it God's way. They don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to humble themselves and do it God's way. I commonly encounter survivors who pray powerful prayers of deliverance that are designed to set the dissociative parts of their system free. So they'll sit and pray these prayers when they don't even know what's behind dissociative walls. And because the host personality has not done memory work with these dissociated parts in the back of the system, the prayer only serves to aggravate demons, to activate booby traps and backup programs in the system. And this can be dangerous to the survivor, especially early on in the recovery process when very little information is shared between the parts of the system. Omega suicide programming, brain scramble programs, they can be set off and render the survivor non functional and suicidal. Without foundational work on trauma memories that resolves internal conflicts between parts and then causes the dissociative walls to come down, deliverance prayers should not be prayed. Binding and loosing prayers are the appropriate choice until the survivor is ready to maintain their freedom. The survivor must have enough conscious awareness of their parts that they're praying to get free in order for them to maintain their freedom. So you can have a survivor tell you, I'm ready, I'm ready. But if they don't have co-consciousness and awareness of the parts that you're praying a prayer to deliver, they aren't ready. They won't be able to maintain their freedom. Um, and the reason why is because deliverance, it's about repenting. It's about turning your life from the sinful way of coping that you have done, and you exert your will to say, I'm going to follow Christ so I can maintain that deliverance. If the front part doesn't even know what the back parts are doing and they're praying deliverance, they can't truly repent, right? They don't even know what they're repenting of. And when a survivor prays deliverance prayers for parts that are still cult loyal or parts who still only know how to get their needs met using demons, Those parts can't maintain their deliverance through those prayers that the prayers afforded them. Those dissociated parts will still carry the pain of their abuse because you've not allowed healing in they're still dissociated behind the wall. And so the host personality has those dissociative walls up. They remain because they don't want to look at what's back there. And so they prayed a prayer that drove away the demons, and those demons that served as the main coping strategy for those dissociative parts. And so the host has this huge void left. It's the same thing as, like, demons. If the house is left unkept, if it's not filled with the good, the demons come back 7 times stronger. And so you have this huge void for the dissociated parts, and there's no other option for those back dissociated parts but to invite the demons to come back in so they can cope. And this is just what they do. I've seen it again and again. So I want you to remember that the demons are not the problem. The demons are a symptom that Christ is not living and reigning in those dissociated areas of a person's life. Fallen entities will keep being attracted to those sinful coping strategies of the survivor until the survivor looks at how they're coping, and until they let Christ and their fellow man heal the pain of their abuse. And they put into play new and healthy ways of coping with life's challenges rather than ignoring it and dissociating it away from their conscious awareness. All Christians, whether they dissociate or not, we are all called to be conformed into the image and likeness of Christ. This is a lifetime journey of walking with Christ, to experience his love and goodness, and to surrender more and more of our self-life to Yeshua. To do this in degrees is what we're supposed to do until we are dead men walking, until we are a true living sacrifice. We're supposed to become so surrendered to Christ that it's no longer I who live and exert my own will and wants, but it's Christ within me living out his life and executing his will through me. Deprogramming is this redemptive process for the survivor. Deprogramming equates to discipleship and the confirmation of the survivor into the image and likeness of Christ. Just like you and I cannot pray a prayer of deliverance and be done with it. All of a sudden you prayed a prayer and now you are walking and living conformed in the image and likeness of Christ. Neither can a survivor just pray that prayer and cope and live the same way. Self-examination, serious soul searching, and life-changing God encounters pave the way for that transformed life to happen. For this reason, there is no such thing as pray a deliverance prayer and the survivor is deprogrammed and delivered. The survivor must walk this journey out with Christ just like the rest of us. So only a small percentage of the recovery process involves praying these deliverance prayers. The deliverance prayers breaks the legal rights and untethers the survivor from the entities, but that's like 5% of the time that your healing time, right? Maybe less. 90+% is you becoming, you being discipled, you learning new skills, building new relationships, right? Do you see that? We tend to, in ministries, focus and go, everything's in that deliverance prayer. No, it's not. It's futile to pray that prayer unless the 90+% of the previous work's been done to make you ready to maintain that deliverance. And I said this to illustrate the point that healing and programming is not passive. There's no quick answer or method. There's no fast track to the finish line. And anyone who promises you that is lying or they're deceived. The survivor has to grow in relationships and surrender to God. He must likewise grow and learn to trust his fellow man if he's truly going to recover. Christian healing ministers often do well with deliverance, with the deliverance, discipleship, spiritual, and the spiritual growth component of healing. But they may miss how important it is to learn new coping skills, social skills, how to gain trust with their fellow man and build community, and how they miss how important belonging is and how foundational it is to the recovery of the survivor. Likewise, Christian counselors tend to have a solid grasp on the human relation component of recovery, but they can leave out the spiritual component of the equation. Both are needed. And without addressing both, the survivor will limp and struggle and never quite get across that finish line.